Our scripture passage today is from the Gospel of Mark, the 5th chapter, the first 20 verses. Listen so that by faith you may hear God's word for you today. They came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gerasenes. When he had stepped out of the boat, immediately a man out of the tombs with an unclean spirit met him. He lived among the tombs, and no one could restrain him anymore, even with the chain, for he'd often been restrained with shackles and chains, but the chains he wrenched apart, and the shackles he broke in pieces. And no one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always howling and bruising himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and bowed down before him, and he shouted at the top of his voice, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." For he said to them, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." Then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" He replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." He begged him earnestly not to send him out of the country. Now there on the hillside a great herd of swine was feeding. And the unclean spirits begged him, "Send us into the swine, let us enter them." So he gave them permission, and the unclean spirits came out and entered the swine, and the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down the steep bank into the sea and were drowned in the sea. The swineherds ran off and told it to the city and in the country. Then people came to see what it was that had happened. Then came to Jesus and saw the demoniac sitting there, clothed and in his right mind, the very man who'd had the legion, and they were afraid. Those who had seen what had happened to the demoniac and to the swine reported it. Then they began to beg Jesus to leave their neighborhood. And he was getting into the boat. The man who had been possessed by demons begged him that he might be with him. But Jesus refused and said to him, "Go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and what mercy he has shown to you." And he went away and began to proclaim to the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and everyone was amazed. May we share a word of prayer together. Loving one, may the words of my mouth, the meditations of all our hearts be pleasing to you, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. I find it fascinating that Denise chose a unique story to tell the kids today. And I chose to start with a children's story myself today, not from a book, but from my maternal grandfather, who used to tell all kinds of stories. And this story was first told to me in 1973 when I was a 3-year-old child. My grandfather wanted to tell me stories and wanted the stories to be the very lessons that I would take with me in my life. There was a young boy named Matthew, and he had come home from school, and he seemed a little upset about his day at school. And his parent says, "Matthew, how you doing today?" "Not very good." "Well, what's wrong? What happened at school?" "Oh, there's a new kid in my class, and I don't like him." "Well, what's wrong with this new kid?" "Well, he wears different clothes, and he speaks a different language, and I don't know, I just don't like him. He's messed everything up." And he went rushing up into his room. His parents had a conversation and decided on a plan. And so Matthew's mother goes upstairs into his room and says, "Matthew, we want you to play a game tomorrow. Do you like games?" "I love games. What game do you want me to play?" "We want you to play kind of a hide-and-seek type of game, kind of almost like a mystery discovery game." "That sounds real exciting. I like mysteries. I like discoveries. I like finding things. What game do you want me to play?" "Well, it's tomorrow. And what we want you to do, but before we tell you the game, remind me your favorite dessert, Matthew." "It's strawberry shortcake." "Okay, that's what I thought, but I just kind of making sure." So the game is, when you go to school tomorrow, we want you to find 3 things you like about your new friend at school. And if you can find 3 things about this person that's new in your school, we'll have strawberry shortcake for dinner tomorrow night. Well, if it's strawberry shortcake, maybe I can do it. And Matthew goes off to school and comes back at the end of school, and they're at the dinner table, and Matthew's parents say, well, it's time to talk about our game today. Did you go on your mystery search today? I did. And did you find 3 things about your friend? Unfortunately, I did. What were some of the things you learned about your friend? We were at recess today, and he was up to bat, and he was getting ready to swing the ball, and the pitcher threw the ball, and it was clearly a ball. It was outside the strike zone, but the umpire, one of our friends, called it a strike. And my friend just looked back. He didn't complain, and he just kept on playing. He was a good sport. And then we were transitioning from period 3 to period 4, and he opened the door for everybody. He was the first one at the door. Had it been me, I would have just gone right in, but he held the door open, let everybody else go in before me. And he was really kind to people. And then we got to choir class, and the teacher had us sing the song. He had the best voice of anybody in choir class. His parent says, well, was that difficult to find 3 things about your friend? Well, it wasn't too hard. He's just so different from my life experience. Well, we've got a treat for you. We've got your strawberry shortcake. But we've got another treat for you. We've invited your friend from school over to share that dessert with you. And the doorbell rang, and his friend showed up, and they darted up the stairs, and they played some games. They came back down and had strawberry shortcake, then ran back up the stairs and played some more, and it got to the end of the evening, and his friend left, and he was telling to his parents, he likes cars, just like we were playing cars all over the place upstairs. And not only that, he loves puzzles, and I love puzzles. And we put at least 3 puzzles together while we were upstairs playing with one another. And Matthew walks up the stairway and turns back to his parents, and he says to them, isn't it fun to like people? I was told that story when I was 3 years old. And it's stuck with me, as you can tell. The stories, the narratives that resonate in our minds dictate how we live our life with other people. A narrative of inclusion, a narrative of exclusion, a life of welcome, a life of casting out. Our story in Mark 5 is a fascinating story. It's pretty early in the Gospel of Mark, 5th chapter. Chapter 4, the back half of chapter 4, Jesus is sharing all the parables of the beloved community, the mustard seed and the sower, and what it means to be this great community in the world. And we get to chapter 5, and Jesus gets off the boat in a different place. And what do we find is a person that seems possessed or is demonic or whatever. And where is he living? Amongst the tombs. Now, the tombs are usually reserved for people that are already dead. If this guy was living amongst the tomb, the community essentially thought of him as living dead. Nowhere to be included in their community. He was dead to them. Might as well be in where the tombs are, where the dead people reside. We're going to shackle him and chain him up and cast him out to the outer edges of the community so no one's not even have to see him, let alone walk by him. And Jesus enters in this community. The first person to greet him in the community is the person from the tombs. I mean, talk about a hungering for community, a hungering for anybody to have a conversation with, someone new. Maybe this person will talk to me. Maybe this person will relate to me. Maybe this person won't cast me out like everybody else. Tyler Sitt has a book entitled Staying Awake. And the title of the book is based on the story of the disciples that continue to fall asleep in the garden while Jesus tries to pray. That's where the impetus of the title comes from. Stay awake. Tyler Sitt, in several chapters into the book, one of the chapters he entitles is Staying Awake to the Community. We don't get lulled into our comfort zones. We don't get lulled into our own rhythms of doing things. We don't get lulled into the how I want to live in the world. We must stay awake to the community and be observing of people and experiences and where people are excluded, people are cast out, people are not to feel welcome in a community. Because everything that Jesus spoke about in chapter 4 of the mustard seed and spreading the seeds, it was all about building up community, reinforcing what it means to be community. And here we have a community, instead of expanding its notions of what community is, puts a wall between themselves and the people they fear or feel like might be a danger to them in some way, rather than reaching out to them and discovering who they are, and discovering that there might be something in common with that person that seems so different from me. I think this person in the story in Mark 5 was simply wanting to live out his freedom as an individual. James Cone, who is an author of Black theology, in his book God of the Oppressed, says that freedom is not something we give to one another. He says in his book, a white slave owner does not give freedom to a black slave. That's something that human beings don't give to one another. Freedom is a gift that comes to us from the moment we are born, when we enslave one another, when we minimize the other, when we create walls of division and separation. We are living counter to the created nature in which we're intended to be, and that is free. Free to be who we are, who God created us to be, and to celebrate the uniqueness of who we are in this world. Jesus was staying awake to community when he entered that city. Now, the interesting thing about this is this person that had been kind of redeemed in the story, and the demon had been cast out from his life. What does he want to do? What does he want to do? He wants to hang out with Jesus. Can I go with you on the boat? Can I travel with you? I mean, he clearly found someone that understands him, is willing to give him a second chance, willing for him to have his own identity in his own unique way. And Jesus says, no, I want you to stay back. And I want you to tell your story to anybody that will listen to it. You can now go back to that story because you are no longer possessed. There is no reason for them to cast you out and have you on the edges of society anymore. You are no longer living among the dead. You are now living among the living. That this person who was out on the edges and not even be given attention was now a person that was a storyteller, a game changer, a community former in that community. Now, some of you know through our work with Interfaith Work, Eyüp Eason, who is one of the leads of the Dialogue Institute and the Raindrop Foundation, and we've done several with that Muslim community over the years. Many of you know that in October of last year, their administrative offices were vandalized and destroyed, about $70,000 worth of damage to their facility. About a week or two later, we had an evening, a gathering of support to show our encouragement to the Dialogue Institute, to Eyüp, and the community of faith that they were a part. At that evening, when we were offering our support, Eyüp got up to the microphone and said, we have learned through the investigation that the damage was done by a group of teenagers. And they might have done it out of hate, out of a lack of knowledge, out of a lack of understanding. And maybe our first gut reaction, he would say, would be to be angry, to get revenge, or to get back at the very people. He said, that's not what we're about. we're about a people of peace. He said, I'm going to reach out to those families and try to connect with them. I'm going to reach out to the school in which they're a part, and maybe there's something we can do to create an orientation of having better understanding of ourselves to the local school that's closest to us. How easy it would have been to build up a wall and say, we need better safety here. We need to protect ourselves from these individuals. Rather, Youp's idea was not to build a wall, but to build a bridge, to build connection, build understanding. And when you have a chance to sit down with someone, you discover you have far more alike than you have unalike with someone. And we can clearly point out the things. When someone thinks differently than us, we can clearly point out the differences. All you have to do is look at social media, look at the news, look at our political landscape. It is about as divisive and divisive as you can find. And we have forgotten, as a society, how to stay awake for community. Our sense of community has shrunk down to the sense of community of people that think like us and pits us against one another. But if we were created from the moment we were born to be free, it takes a little bit of risk, but I think the risk pays off in terms of the relationship that's formed in the long run. Denise asked our children this morning, who is my neighbor? I often think that the neighbor circle is kind of an interesting thing to think about. Is where do we draw the boundary for neighbor? Is it my family? And I draw a circle around my family, that's my neighbor. Or maybe I can widen it a little bit further, make it my church family. My church family, that's my neighbor. I mean, these are my people. I can draw my circle around my church family. What about my extended family? And sometimes in our own extended families, not sure we want to be a neighbor to some of our extended family members. There's always the black sheep of the family, the person that's kind of off on the edges. Do we draw our circle around neighbor around our extended family? What about the city of Olathe? Can we draw a line? Can we circle Olathe and say, Olathe is our neighbors? Is that enough? I mean, you can kind of see where I'm going, is that we often want to put a boundary and create a definition of neighbor when actually the boundary is not a solid line. It's this perforated line that keeps getting expanded and pushed out further and further for who we understand our neighbor to be. When we don't stay awake to community and we fall asleep, then we allow hate and fear to drive the narrative that tells our story. We find out that over the last several years, our Jewish friends have encountered the greatest amount of hate crimes in our country. Our LGBTQ friends, almost as much hate as our Jewish friends. We continue to find hate against race and hate against those that have and those that don't have. We are simply just asleep to community. Jesus' first interaction when he gets off the boat is the person that's living among the dead. And his goal, I guess, is to move him from living among the dead to restoring community again. Our resurrection hope, if we're going to find it anywhere, we're finding it in our neighbor. And it starts with ourselves. We often forget that when it says, love our neighbor, there's a second half to that. Love our neighbor as ourself. We are community. And the stories we tell make a difference. Sometimes the stories that make a difference can stretch back all the way to 1973. And for some, even further back than that. What are the stories and the narratives that help you open up and discover again what the expanded definition of neighbor might be for you?